Hi, I'm Matt Turck. Welcome to the Matt Podcast. Today we have a fantastic episode with Clément Delangue, the CEO of Hugging Face.
Hugging Face.
Hugging Face.
Hugging Face.
Hugging Face has had a remarkable rise in the AI space, from creating the Transformers library to becoming a key platform where the AI community collaborates on models, data sets, and applications, most recently valued at $4.5 billion. We covered a bunch of topics, including Hugging Face's pivot story.
I think I'm going to spend the weekend hacking around it. And then on Monday, he releases and tweets about it. We get maybe like 1,000 likes on his tweet. Well, we broke the internet.
The geopolitics of open source.
China has been publishing much more open source AI. They're probably the leader today of open source AI.
And why AI founders should just trash the Lean Startup Handbook.
I think a lot of the things that we learn with traditional software are like outdated with AI.
Please enjoy this conversation packed with insights with one of the most important CEOs in AI today. Hey Clem, how are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
We're recording this today in New York, which used to be your stomping grounds, but you're in Miami, right? You've been in Miami for a few years?
Yeah, I'm French. I grew up in France, as you can hear from my accent. And then I moved to New York. Spent 8 years in New York. And during COVID, I did the cliche move from New York to Miami. But I'm also traveling a lot, so still spending quite a lot of time in New York, in San Francisco, in Paris.
I should give the disclaimer up front. Actually, a few weeks ago, I had a wonderful chat with Olivier from Datadog, and I gave the warning that it was going to be a conversation between two French people speaking English to each other, which, so people have been warned again. Any thoughts on Miami versus New York versus, in particular, San Francisco? There is this dominant narrative that all AI is built in San Francisco. Is that a problem for you to not be in San Francisco?
Not so much. At Hugging Face, we have a fully remote culture. So we have people like all over, including in San Francisco, in New York, in Miami. Me personally, I enjoy kind of like the move from New York to Miami. It's making me happy, which I think is important. Yeah, important step for co-founder, for CEO to be good at his job. So it's been quite a good move for me.
And so you're fully distributed, but you have a large office in Paris these days. Is that fair?
Yeah. So we're a hybrid company. So people can work from anywhere in the world. Usually, when there are a couple of people, 3, 4, 5 people, they take an office in the city that they are at. So I think we have maybe 12, 13 small offices all over the world. The biggest one being Paris, where we have, I think, around 25% of the team based here. The 3 founders of Hugging Face are French. So we have quite a lot of French roots, but we consider ourselves like an international company. So not an American company, not a French company, but an international company with people from all over the world.
You've become one of the leading voices in open source AI. What would you say is the current state of open source AI?
3-4 years ago, AI was extremely open and collaborative. All the research that was created was published. Most of the models were open sourced, right? So at the time, as you mentioned, it was GPT, GPT-2, there was BERT, there was ExcelNet. Obviously, Google kicked off this wave with Attention is All You Need, which is like the seminal paper for Transformers, which is the T in ChatGPT. Over the following years, the field that became a bit more closed, a bit more commercially driven. Right, some of the big players started to share a little bit less of their research, open source models, a bit less actually, and put them behind APIs. And that's where we are today. I think the field is much more closed, much less collaborative, much less science driven than it used to be, and I regret it. Because for me, the progress of AI depends on being more open, more collaborative. As a matter of fact, I think we got where we are today thanks to this era of being open in terms of science and in terms of models. So I hope we can go back to fostering more open science and open source in the future. I think it would be the right direction for the development of this technology.
On the other hand, as you had predicted, I think at the end of last year, is that fair to say like open source AI is basically on par in terms of performance with the commercial models?
Yeah, I think it's quite fair to say that. It depends a little bit on the domains, on the modalities. So, for example, I think open source is actually ahead of closed source for most of the text applications today, especially when you have like a very specific narrow use case. Maybe not for like a very generic generalist use case like search, right? Search, you need more kind of like a large model, and that's more provided by the API providers. But whenever you want to build kind of like a more narrow specific use case, open source is generally better. There are some domains where it's different. For example, video. I think video generation right now, there's not enough open source. So there are more kind of like proprietary approaches. But it varies over time, right? It's kind of like the typical technology cycle where whenever there's a void in open source or proprietary, there are like kind of like new startups emerging that are leading the field. So the same way you've had OpenAI, which was originally open source and very open for the first 5 years of their existence. The same way you've had a stability AI or like a runway that's been built on top of stable diffusion. I think in all the domains where there's not a lot of open source, there's a lot of room for new startups to be created and take a big position and have an impact on the field.
And presumably Llama is a breath of fresh air for the whole open source AI movement.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to understand is that open source is really kind of like the foundation for everything else, right? So it's really the tide that lifts all boats in a way. Even the closed source companies are massively using open science and open source. As a matter of fact, OpenAI is using open source, is a customer of Hugging Face, and obviously is building on top of the open research, right? As I was mentioning, that's the T in ChatGPT, which is Transformer and open research published by Google. So in a way, like by contributing to this foundation, you accelerate the whole field of AI. You make it more accessible to everyone. I think one important fight that I'm picking is to try to build a field where you can create competition and where all startups can build AI instead of relying on a few companies, because I think there are very strong natural tendencies for concentration of power in AI. So thanks to open source, you fight a little bit these natural tendencies and create more opportunities for all companies to build with AI.
But is there any way, in your opinion, that this can be sort of re-accelerated or encouraged? Because I guess you could argue Llama as, perhaps there is an altruistic aspect to it somewhere, but fundamentally, I guess it's a question of, Meta not wanting platform dependency for AI the way that platform dependency for Apple. So do you think in a world where there's so much money at stake, people have any kind of incentive to do open source these days?
I think so, because I think compared to software, AI is much more science-driven. And I think if you look at science and how it's been done forever, it's more for altruistic motive, and it's been more in a way that researchers are publishing, sharing their research and building on top of each other. So I think there is this kind of like incentive that is very strong for AI. As I mentioned, there are very important business opportunities in open source AI. Sometimes people simplistically oppose kind of like open source with monetization. But actually, as we've seen in software, there are really great open source companies, open source commercial companies that are very successful. And I would expect there to be even more in AI. We'll have kind of like the MongoDB, the Elastic, the Red Hat of AI, which are going to be like open source AI companies. So there are a lot of commercial opportunities with open source. And finally, I think in AI, it's such an important technology that I believe the public, I believe the policymakers will require it to be shared across as some sort of kind of like a fundamental infrastructure for all. Mm-hmm. So there might be in the future, hopefully, more and more policy incentives, maybe, for more open source AI as a way to give access, be more inclusive with this technology instead of concentrating it in the hands of everyone.
Yeah, you anticipated my question, and I remember watching you from afar on TV in front of Congress. I think that was in June of 2023, which, by the way, as a French-born person, must have been quite an experience to like show up and testify in front of the U.S. Congress. Anything that you have seen people do or talk about from a policy standpoint that would be that you'd be in favor of from an open source AI perspective?
Yeah, this week is a good example in terms of regulation. If you take the specific case of California, because yesterday Governor Newsom vetoed and accepted two different bills. One which was really kind of like more creating more constraints for small tech. And everyone to build AI and was really having the risk of concentrating power. And another one that is more creating, I think, better incentive for AI, which actually mandates AI builders to share the data sets that their models have been trained on, which is an opportunity to create more inclusivity, understand the bias, the limitations of your models. So like on any technology topics, there's going to be some good regulation, some bad regulation. In general, for me, I'm in favor of the regulations that are creating more competition, more opportunities for everyone to build with AI, and tackling some of the end user risks of AI today, like the risk of misinformation, the risk of biases, instead of focusing on more sci-fi driven, long-term kind of like hypothesis, like the doomsday scenario where AI is gonna take control and kill us all. I think policymakers have made a lot of progress in the past few years in their understanding of AI and how they can approach the topic. So I'm quite excited to see what they're going to come up in the next few years.
By the way, what is open source AI? May have asked that at the beginning of this conversation about OpenAI, but is that open sourcing the model? Is that open sourcing the data set? There was like this whole controversy about weights versus not weights. Where are we on all of that?
So it's a gradient, right? Openness is a gradient from kind of like full open source AI, which would be considered kind of like a practice where you share the weights, you share the data sets that you use to train the model. You usually share the training scripts for reproducibility, to give everyone the ability to retrain the model themselves. That's kind of like the most extreme side of the gradient. And then, the more you go towards more secrets, for example, you open source the weights, you don't open source the data sets, which in my opinion are still a good step and a step in the right direction, and still kind of like an impactful thing to do. Depending on your company constraints, of course, like not everyone can share everything that they're doing. But in general, the more we can push towards the more open side of the gradient, the better for the world, because then you give more power for everyone to build with AI. You foster the progress of the field because everyone can learn from your mistake or for what works to reproduce that. And the more kind of like transparent it is, so it helps with like biases. For example, you can see that some bias are contained in the data set. It helps with education because you can understand why the model is not answering that but is answering like that. So the more towards openness, the better for the field.
And this slowing down of open source AI, is that more of a US thing, or are different parts of the world behaving differently when it comes to open source AI?
Yeah, it's more US thing. In opposition to that, I think China has been publishing much more open source AI lately. I would argue that they're probably the leader today of open source AI. Which is surprising to some, but for example, in video, they've been leading in open source AI, which is kind of like for us being in the US can be sometimes challenging because as it is kind of like the foundation for everything, it means that American companies are then building on Chinese foundations. Mm. Which leads to some challenges. We can take an example, maybe with Grok, which is kind of like the ex-Twitter model that is based on open source. Let's say, for example, if they were using a Chinese open source model for image generation instead of using kind of like an American model, then when you would use in the US like the Grok chatbot, you wouldn't be able to generate the same kind of images that you would with American models. So that leads to some very, very interesting questions. France also has promoted open source much more than the US. And that's why I was happy to be at Congress to try to explain and make the case for why it's important for the US to keep fostering, keep promoting, keep pushing for open source.
It's fascinating, especially in the case of China. Why do you think that is? There was for a while there was this perception and probably concern that there was going to be a bifurcation and that there was going to be a Chinese world of AI and Western world of AI. But it's really interesting to hear that the Chinese actually publishing more in a way that precisely can be open to the rest of the world. Is that a power play of some sort? Like, what do you think might be the driver?
I think it's a cycle. Definitely, I think if the US is open sourcing less, there are opportunities for others to take the lead. I think maybe because they came in the technology cycle a bit later. They see it as an opportunity to catch up and take the lead faster. So it's always hard to kind of like find the motives behind it. But it's a very clear pattern that we're seeing with most of the best open source models now, with a lot of modalities coming out from Chinese labs.
And then speaking of modality, another interesting topic that I've heard you talk about is large models versus smaller models and specialized models. What's your current thinking on this, of which one matters more, which one lends itself to open source more?
So we just crossed 1 million public models. Amazing. On Hugging Face.
Congratulations.
So it's a very big counterpoint to the one model to rule them all. I call it a fallacy. I think big models, big generalist models are good for some use cases, especially when you have a generalist use case. So if you're doing search and you want your search, or if you're doing ChatGPT and you want it to be able to talk about everything, a big model makes sense. Now, when you want to do kind of like, let's say, banking customer support chatbot, you don't really need it to tell you about the meaning of life, right? You can use a much smaller, more specialized model that is going to be cheaper to run, faster to run, easier to retrain, more controllable. that makes more sense. And so I think that's what companies are realizing. Sometimes using kind of like the big models as the first experiment, first kind of like proof of concept. And then when they want to go faster, save money, increase accuracy on their specific use case, then they switch to a smaller, more customized model. So I think we're gonna end up in a world where there are both, right? On both sides of the spectrum, some extremely large, powerful, generalist, costly models for some use cases, all the way down to very specialized, simple, optimized models. And depending on your use case, you're gonna use different ones.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I guess that's a big part of the thesis, especially for the sort of enterprise and business part of Hugging Face. An
interesting analogy is code repositories, right? To me, the way we approach AI is just a new paradigm of software. You had software 1.0, AI is software 2.0. You wouldn't think that there's one code base to rule them all. Right, like you understand quite clearly now that every company can write their own code, have their own code repository for their specific use case. And I think it's the same for AI. So the same way today, every company, every product has its own code base. Tomorrow, every company, every use case is going to have its own model optimized. So we sometimes say at Hugging Face that there's going to be as many models as code repositories today. So GitHub has hundreds of millions of code repositories that are all customized for specific use cases. In a similar way, hopefully in a few years, in Hugging Face is going to be hundreds of millions of models for all specific use cases.
To play it back, it sounds like you're saying that actually OpenAI or any commercial LLM may have a little bit of a graduation risk, that they might be a little bit like training wheels for the enterprise. As the enterprise get more sophisticated, they may either switch away from those, or at least have those being only a part of their ensemble of models. Is that fair?
I don't know if it's a general rule. It's something that we're noticing. We're seeing a lot of companies who started their AI lifecycle more with like a large model and then moving on to smaller models.
Smaller and open source.
Yeah. It's these things are really hard to predict. I think at the end of the day, we're still very early in the technology cycle. And early technology cycles tend to be a bit irrational in a way, right? It's not so much kind of like the technology benefit that drives kind of like decision making. It's almost more like the hype. It's even more kind of like the word of mouth, like the perception of technology. So I'm excited to see in the next few years how the technology cycle evolves, how it matures, and if kind of like decision making from companies, from enterprise, evolve a little bit and become a bit more rational in a way. And I think it's going to be good not only, for us as kind of like a little bit biased towards this model, but also for the world in many aspects. For example, when we think about energy consumption, which to me is like a very, very big topic, going towards more specialized, smaller, less energy consuming models, hopefully will make some of our challenges easier to solve. And again, as I mentioned before, I think smaller, more customized models also kind of like mitigate the natural tendencies of concentration of power in the sense that everyone can play with them, everyone can build with them, everyone can train them, compared to a world where you only have big models and just a few players are able to play this game.
And then the second thing I wanted to unpack is that software 1.0 versus software 2.0 analogy. If you could just talk to that, because it's So first of all, if I understand correctly, Software 1.0 being, the way that software has been built for many, many years, and Software 2.0 being building technology and software with AI, which is actually, as much as people are excited about AI, not necessarily a widely held view that all technology is going to be built with AI. But is that your view?
So AI is a terrible name for the current technology, because artificial intelligence is kind of like calling these concepts of independence, this concept of like sentience, this concept that it's like a foreign kind of like intelligence, obviously calling from a lot of sci-fi around the topic. The way we see it is just kind of like the new paradigm to build all software in the way that before, the way you were doing technology was by writing millions lines of code and kind of like really rule-based approach to building products. Now you do it differently. You start from the data sets, and you train a model and you optimize the model, and then that's what kind of like is the foundation for your technology product. And I think that's the right way to approach this new technology, and realize that companies are building this technology, controlling this technology, and iterating on it to progressively do the current use cases of technology better, and also creating new capabilities. So we started by making search better with AI. And also, we created new use cases like ChatGPT, which is like a new way of conversing with a technology system. And hopefully, in the next few years, we'll continue that way, in the sense that we'll make current technology products, current technology use cases better, and then enable new use cases.
But you're in the camp of that way of building code is the way that fast forward 10 years, all code will start with AI, as opposed to like somebody, more of a co-pilot kind of like analogy where, people will do it manually still, for lack of a better term, and then have AI by the side. You think that, AI-driven code generation is going to be 100% of technology creation?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of like the new paradigm to build all tech. So I think in a few years, if you build a product without the help of AI, it's going to be like creating a shop without kind of like a software 20 years ago, which doesn't mean that it's not going to completely disappear, right? You still open shops today, maybe without software, but the norm will be to build products and technologies with AI, in my opinion.
For the sort of second half of this conversation, let's talk about Hugging Face, starting with the founding story. So Hugging Face is one of those fascinating stories in technology. I guess we were talking about like Twitter and X, a little bit like Twitter, that came out of a podcasting company. Hugging Face came out of a different product. Do you want to give us all the detail? What did that chatbot do?
Yeah, we started out of our excitement and passion for AI. And at the time, 8 years ago now, we were like, okay, what's like a scientifically challenging topic that we can work on, but that is fun at the same time? And ended up starting building this Tamagotchi AI, right? So at the time, it's like a Siri, Alexa, but we wanted to make it entertaining. We did that for a bit more than 3 years. So it was
kind of character AI today.
Yes, kind of character AI or ChatGPT, but kind of like entertaining. Yeah. Not saying that ChatGPT is not entertaining, but more focused on entertainment, I guess. And we were lucky to kind of like work very early on transformer models, on transfer learning for NLP. And the kind of like origin story of the pivot is quite interesting with Thomas, one of our co-founder.
Thomas
and
Wolf.
And chief scientist, coming up to Julien and I on I think it was on a Friday afternoon. There's this thing that came up, which is called BERT from Google, but it kind of sucks because it's in TensorFlow, and most people today want to use PyTorch. So he said, I think I'm gonna spend the weekend hacking around it and maybe like release something. And then on Monday he releases PyTorch implementation of BERT and tweets about it. I think at the time we get maybe like 1,000 likes on his tweet on Twitter, and we're like, wow, we broke the internet. At the time we were like literally like nobody's didn't really have much of a visibility. And then progressively we realized that there was something around kind of like not just creating the final application, but providing a platform, providing technology for companies to adopt this new paradigm for building software.
Mm-hmm.
So after a few months, I think in addition to BERT, we added, or the researchers from the labs added ExcelNet, which was from Guillaume Lample at Meta, who's now the founder of Mistral. We added GPT at the time from OpenAI, and then progressively it evolved into this platform that is Hugging Face today.
And that became the Transformers library?
Transformers library, yes. Yeah. That's kind of like, so the first repository was PyTorch pre-trained BERT, which became PyTorch Transformers when we added more models than BERT, which became Transformers.
Which is one of the most successful open source library of all time, right? And the T in GPT.
So that's one of these examples of pivots, right? Of kind of like this ability of startups to be flexible, to be opportunistic, to kind of like follow when you see some demand, some kind of like potential in the market. And for us, it's also a good example of like community-driven evolution of a startup, because it's really kind of like the community that gave us the signal that it was useful, and then the community that helped us make it better by adding more models from the early models to then contributing
when
more.
was that moment? Because having a highly successful library is one thing, but then turning yourself into a platform to host a bunch of different libraries and models and all the things. When did that happen? It
started quite early. Even in kind of like the first days of Thomas releasing kind of like the first port of BERT, I think open source contributors started to solve bugs, right? And kind of like improve some small things. And then progressively, as we added more models, more contributors started to add more models. So progressively, the community contributed more and more. And we felt this movement where the more we contributed to the community, the more open source we did, the more the community was giving us back. Mm-hmm. So it validated us into this approach to today, as I mentioned, where we have 5 million AI builders using our platform, who collaboratively shared 1 million public models. Half of them have been downloaded in the past 30 days. So most of them are actually very useful and active for the community. They also contributed, I think it's more than 200,000 data sets to the platform. So it's open data sets that anyone can go and use to fine-tune, to customize their models for specific language, specific domains, specific use cases. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And collectively, they built over 300,000 spaces, which are the apps on the Hugging Face platform.
When did you feel you sort of had it? Like this idea of being the GitHub for machine learning or AI, rewind back to whenever that was, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, that general period of time, there were a number of companies that were sort of talking about doing this, and none of them really ever took off. And, in some ways, GitHub never became the GitHub way. Why do you think that is, and why do you think you were able to break through? Was it perfect timing? Was it transformers? What were the reasons?
Luck. It was. I think it's a big aspect in anyone's success. Sometimes we forget to talk about it, and we kind of look back at things, and we're like, okay, I had the perfect strategy, I had the perfect approach to things. The truth is that we got lucky in many ways. We got lucky in terms of timing, as you mentioned. I think we were at the right time, at the right place. We were lucky in terms of who we were as founders, compared to in alignment with what we were trying to build. We were before we had some experience around consumer, and so I think it helped us to have a very community-driven approach instead of maybe a more enterprise-driven approach, or a more traditional kind of B2B approach. And then we got lucky that the community adopted us and started to contribute to our platform, and that we could collaborate with a lot of the products that were around at the time. Right from the beginning, actually, we took much more of a collaborative approach with others than a competitive approach. Mm-hmm. And so it helped us kind of to focus on where we were adding value in a way to the community, where we were building kind of something useful for the community, and usually integrating with other offering and other technology products when it was making more sense.
Because right now you are in the AI ecosystem in a pretty extraordinary position, which is that in a world where you have the OpenAIs and the Gemini and Anthropics competing neck and neck, every other day there seems to be one that beats the other with the latest models. Is that fair to say you pretty much have no competitor? I mean, it sort of feels like everybody has given up on trying to be the next Hugging Face.
Yes and no. There are always some sort of kind of alternatives that emerge regularly from a whole bunch of players, from kind of big tech, cloud providers sometimes, from kind of more emerging startups focusing on some parts of the platform. What's exciting to us is we have obviously some sort of a network effect as kind of a platform for collaboration in AI that I think make us quite in a quite position. I think what we're excited about too is that we're profitable these days, and so we managed to find kind of a business model that creates some sustainability for us, and a way to see the future without having to take short-term kind of decisions, which is important for us as a community platform. In a way, we want to make sure that we're here for the long term for the community. So that's kind of the things that we're excited about. But
profitable, what a concept. You meaning you don't burn
yeah,
$5 billion a year?
In AI, it's people don't understand sometimes. You mean profitable just on the inference, right? Not on the training. You mean profitable based on the billions of dollars that you raised. It's quite unusual for AI startups. But I think we'll see it more and more in the current cycle of VC funding too, where
you think that's going to dry up?
I think as I was mentioning, there are a lot of investors who caught up and became obsessed about AI, leading to some kind of irrational decisions, and that changed a little bit in the past year. 18 months maybe. So it's definitely proved to be a bit harder, I think, for most startups in AI these days to raise than it used to be. So we're seeing, for example, a lot of M&A activity these days, both for kind of big organizations, right? The depth inflection of the world, but also for smaller organizations. For example, I receive tons of inbounds these days of like early stage startups wanting or getting excited about being acquired by Hugging Face. We actually acquired 2 in the past 4 months.
Yeah. What were those while we're on the topic?
So we acquired a company called Argila, which has been working for a few years now on the topic of data sets and collaborative annotation of data sets. Really great team based out of Spain.
So it's a product expansion for you. The reason for the acquisition.
Topic expansion, because data sets are growing fast on Hugging Face, and we think it's a very important artifact of the AI building process. They raised actually from ENIAC here, based in New York, and those are great investors. And the second one that we acquired is called Xitub, which is a team that did a previous startup that got acquired by Apple, then worked for a couple of years on the AI platform at Apple, and then started their new companies a few years ago. That is joining us from Seattle, which is building a very interesting infrastructure for models and data sets. Specifically kind of like enabling the ability for better versioning for models and data sets. Basically, a simplistic way to understand it is that today, when you have like a data set of like, let's say 1 million data points, and you want to update it with 1,000 more data points, you almost have to re-upload 1,000 data points, versus kind of like their technology that is replacing an existing technology that both Hugging Face and GitHub is using, is enabling you to kind of like just add the 1,000 data sets, so enabling much faster AI building and much faster iteration, both on models and data sets. Mm-hmm. So we're excited about both.
What do you look for? In general, what's interesting to you for like anybody listening to this that feels like working with Hugging Face would be a lot more fun than being by themselves? Like, what are you looking for?
We do it quite similarly to how we hire, in the sense that we don't really take kind of like a top-down strategic approach to it, where we're like, okay, there are these topics, and we need to acquire companies in this topic. Instead, we're trying to find teams that share our culture of doing things, our company culture, share our mission of democratizing AI thanks to open source. And then we assume that if we bring in teams like that, they'll manage to find their impact, and then we adapt our roadmap and our evolution based on them. So what works for us is really teams that are impact, action driven, and that like to work in a very decentralized approach with like openness and a strong drive to contribute to the community. Mm-hmm. And then we can acquire different stages. As I said, we're like lucky to be profitable. We raised a bit less than 500 million so far. Most of it is still in the bank. So we have the chance to kind of like do a lot of like different operations depending on what we are excited about.
You had started, we had started going down the path of a little product tour, which I think would be fun to spend a few minutes on. So you mentioned models, data sets, and spaces. So just to go back on models, I'm actually curious. So it looks like the top ones are the llamas. I was just checking like Llama 3.2 as of last night when I was looking at this. Are there like any models that caught your attention or the team's attention in terms of being maybe less obvious or rising fast, or like anything you'd highlight?
Yeah, my favorite page on the Hugging Face platform is the trending model feed, where every week you can see kind of like new models emerging on a lot of different domains, right? Obviously, we talk a lot about text with Llama, But I'm actually much more excited about other modalities. I'm much more excited about audio now, video, image, biology, chemistry. And actually, if I were redoing the talk that I was giving, that NLP is going to change the world. Now I think NLP has changed the world, and it's other modalities that are going to change the world. It's going to be audio, it's going to be video, it's going to be biology, chemistry, AI. These are, in my opinion, the domains that in the next few years are going to change the world the same way NLP has in the past. So right now, if you go to the trending tab of the Hugging Face platform in terms of models, for the first time, I think in the first or second spot, you have an OCR model. So like you give it an image and it extracts the text, which is interesting. I think it's the first time you have this kind of model in the very popular models. You're starting to have a lot of video generation models. I'm extremely excited about them because I think we're going to have the stable diffusion model for video generation soon. There are a lot of proprietary models in video generation, but the first companies that are going to release an open source video generation model, I think it is going to have a tremendous impact. The same way stable diffusion has had a tremendous impact on image. And then one model that I've been excited about this week too is a model that has been released by IBM and NASA on climate prediction, which is not only super interesting, but also super positively impactful. It's a typical example of AI for good, because if you look at climate, and especially the ability to predict severe climate events like hurricanes. I'm in Florida most of the year, so
near and dear your heart.
One thing
in your house.
Two. You can actually save tens of thousands of people if you manage to predict an event like that just a few hours earlier. And so this model that is called PRISV is intended to serve as some sort of a foundation for better research and better models for climate prediction. So I'm excited to see these kinds of models being released by IBM and NASA in the US.
So models, data sets, spaces. So spaces, you were saying, is the place where you can basically showcase applications.
Create applications. Yeah.
Okay.
More and more in production, we see more and more startups using spaces to power their apps. I think with over 300,000 public spaces that have been created, and quite a lot more that are private. One thing that is sometimes not that people don't really realize is that a big part of the usage of the Hugging Face platform now is in private mode, almost as much as what is public. So there's almost 1 million private models on the platform, and it's basically the companies using.
So you said you had 1 million public and also 1 million private. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And it's basically companies using the Hugging Face platform privately as their main platform to build AI, which kind of ties into the most important features that are actually the internal and external collaboration features of the platform. So you don't not only kind of host your models, your datasets, your apps, but you collaborate on them, right? So it's going to be one researcher that is sharing a model, then someone else who can open a pull request, that can comment on the model, that can test the model and tell you, okay, there's a problem for this use case. For this use case, we should improve it. That can contribute more data sets. And so the collaborative approach, the collaborative aspect of the platform is very valuable and what most enterprise are using today.
Mm-hmm. And that includes evaluation tools as well and benchmarking tools?
Yeah, you have some integration with some evaluation tools. For example, it makes it really easy to create leaderboards on the platform. I think we crossed 5,000 leaderboards that have been created on the Hugging Face platform as a way to rank your models based on their accuracy and their performance. And it's kind of like, the way we're trying to do things is in a very open, modular way, in the sense that companies don't have to use everything like end to end. It's more like they pick the features and the functionalities that they like. And because it's mostly open source, it's integrated with a lot of other services and sometimes with their internal services and stack. And so they can really pick what makes sense for them at some point to make the whole AI building process just simpler.
And so let's get into the sort of business model part of Hugging Face. And so you alluded to the enterprise side of things. So there is $9, $20, and then the enterprise tier. Maybe talk about the enterprise tier, which sounds like it's the bulk of the business. And at some point, it sounded like you had a significant consulting business around enterprise customers, but it feels like it's evolved towards being more of that sort of collaboration software platform. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the way we approach things is that we're a platform for AI builders, right? We think most of our usage and users are always going to stay open source and free. And we need to build some sort of a freemium model, right? Where a small percentage of the usage and the users are going to be paid and kind of like fund the rest of the platform. And when you think about the difference between open source, free, and premium, we identified 3 different kind of like variables. It's like premium support and premium features. And usually these appeal the most to enterprise who need kind of like advanced features and more enterprise features, especially around user management, around security and things like that. And then you have premium compute, premium infrastructure, which is very important for AI. And we do this with collaborations with the cloud providers and with our own cloud offering with like inference endpoints and Spaces GPU. So that's kind of like how we approach things.
What would be an example or two, and I don't know if you can give names or not give names, but of large enterprises using all of this?
I mean, most large enterprise building with AI are using us one way or another, are using different blocks, right? Not everyone are using kind of like the same thing. But in terms of kind of like maybe the largest, all the big technology companies are customers of ours and partners of ours, right? So when you think about Microsoft, when you think about NVIDIA, all these companies are massive customers of ours. To kind of like a smaller enterprise, all the way to kind of like the independent developers that are using us too. The thing that has been kind of like growing the most for us lately is this concept of enterprise hub, in the sense that we have 100,000 organizations using the Hugging Face hub. And the idea is for a small percentage of them, especially the most expert ones, they have requirement for more kind of like user management features, security features, like a security kind of like scanner that will scan the new open source models and make sure that it makes sense for their environment. So we have over 2,000 companies using the enterprise hub today, from kind of like Mercedes, Bloomberg, all the way to larger ones like NVIDIA, for example, that I was mentioning.
So with the $20 team tier, I have access to I can have private models and I can collaborate.
Yeah.
And then with separately, I can get the inference endpoint.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pay on a per usage basis.
Yeah.
So I'll pick my model, pick my provider. And then the enterprise hub is where you have all the enterprise grade features, so security, authentication. That's
and usually they consume kind of like a bundle of like premium features, premium support, because usually like they value our help to maximize the usage of the platform, and premium compute. Usually kind of like they value kind of like a bundle of the 3 premium offering that we have.
You don't develop your own models. Is that fair? Because so obviously you got the transformer library, which is a library, but you all were very involved in Bloom.
Yeah.
Was that a one exception that's just not part of the model, or do you view yourself as developing some models, or maybe you do actively?
Yeah, we do develop some models. Not so much as our core kind of like business model than like some other companies, but more as a way to show what's possible, kind of like lead by example, and create value for the community. So when we release everything in open source, not only the models, but usually the data sets and the training scripts for it. Like we did with Bloom. It's an interesting example because at the time there wasn't many open source large language models. People were saying that it was too dangerous to open source large language models, and at the time there was kind of like several teams building large language models. There was big science with Bloom, and Meta also was doing a foray with something called OPT at the time. And actually some of the OPT researchers told us after the fact that we released Bloom in open source really helped them on their internal case, yes, to release OPT. They were like internally saying, if Bloom could be open source, we could open source OPT, and they ended up actually open sourcing OPT, which in some ways kind of like created the open sourcing dynamics at Meta. So in a similar way, when we're seeing gaps in the market, in a way in the field for things for open source, we take advantage of the fact that we have great researchers, that we have resources to train models. So, for example, we released a few months ago something called Idefix, which is a multimodal model before the time that there was a lot of open source models like that. Obviously, with a French name.
Yes, exactly. I'm smiling, but that would be a very obscure reference for anybody who's not French.
Yeah, we realized after the fact that it actually wasn't a good idea because in the US, nobody's getting the reference. It's very arcane for them. Idefix, what does it even mean?
So for reference, it's part of the kind of sort of a cartoon strip that any kid in France of I guess a certain age would have grown up with. And Idefix was the
dog.
The dog, right? Like the dog. So it's a story of a Celtic Gallic tribe called Asterix and Obelix.
Yeah. The data set. So the model was called Idefix. The data set is called Obelix. But so we do train models. We release also open source data sets whenever we feel like it can be impactful for the field.
Well, great. Maybe to close the conversation, maybe a few words on, a combination of entrepreneurial lessons and the Hugging Face culture, because I think you guys have a very strong identity as a company that doesn't necessarily follow the classic Silicon Valley playbook by the letter. Do you want to touch upon that?
Yeah, we're trying to build a different culture. We're not really interested in building a successful company just to build a successful company. If we end up with a company that is similar to companies that are existing today, you would feel like a failure to us as founders. So we've always been very intentional about doing things a bit differently, in ways that is more aligned with our values and what we want to improve in the world. So we're taking a very decentralized approach to company building, where we're trying to give extreme freedom and ownership to all team members to be able to focus on what they're excited about, what makes them happy, what they think can help the world and contribute to the field. So we're very decentralized. We're very impact and action based. We do little to no strategy, no planning, no road mapping. We have zero product manager. We're trying to build this very lean organization where everyone can have an impact, and where the pace of shipping, contributing, building follows the pace of the technology. I think we're in a domain where if you slow down, you're gonna die, because just the train is gonna pass, and very fast you're gonna be outdated, old-fashioned. You're gonna lose your ability to attract the best people in the field, and so you're gonna reach a plateau really fast, which is going to lead to you dying or having to sell your company, like we've seen with many others, like Adapt, Inflection, and companies like that.
And I've heard you say that you have either no or very few KPIs.
We think in a way that a lot of the rules and best practices have been built for the previous generation of startups, right? The software startups. So, for example, sometimes when I meet entrepreneurs, and I can see that they have a lot of the lean startup principles kind of like in mind, I tell them to trash the book. No offense to the author, but I think a lot of the things that we learn with traditional software are like outdated with AI. And actually, if you look at the most successful companies, early companies in AI, like OpenAI, like Hugging Face or others, you could see that they didn't really follow the traditional kind of like company building best practices that we were taking for granted. So we're trying to do things like quite differently in that way. I think it's the same for investors. Actually, I'm doing my own experiment at a very, very small scale, but I've invested in almost 100 startups in the past 2 years. And I've tried to kind of like take a very different approach than what I would do if I was investing in more traditional software companies. Like, for example, the founding teams of AI startups have changed quite drastically. For a software company, the ideal team maybe being kind of like a software engineer with a business person, to in AI sometimes being all scientists, right? All AI scientists being sometimes good founders. So it's interesting to see how this different paradigm calls for different ways of doing things, and we're trying to embed that and to kind of like embody that with Hugging Face.
While we're on the topic, in your portfolio, any that's your chance as an investor to start pimping out your companies, which is what us VC spend half our time doing. But joke aside, like any company that you would highlight in your portfolio, either because they're doing well, but perhaps more interestingly, companies that are not yet really on the radar that people should know about?
It's hard to pick one, especially because obviously also investing is not my job, and I'm like 200% focused on Hugging Face. So I'm doing that a little bit more on my free time. I've been excited about video generation these days. So a company that I haven't invested in, but that I was excited about these days is Hotshot, which is like a video generation app. But there are also a lot of startups that I've invested in or not invested in domains that are harder, I would say, like biology, chemistry, that I think could have a tremendous impact on the field and the world in the next few years.
So maybe to close, next year for you, for the company, for your investment portfolio, any plans, projects, roadmaps, like anything that you look forward to?
Well, we have 5 million AI builders today. I think ultimately there's going to be more AI builders than software engineers, right? Software engineers, you can think maybe today there are 50 million. That's kind of like a safe bet. So for us, the goal is really to keep growing the numbers of AI builders that are using us. Focus on everything non-text. As I said now, NLP is boring, and I'm more excited about images, video, biology, chemistry, time series. So this is a big area of focus for us. Data sets, which are a big way that you can contribute to AI today, almost as much or more than models. When you release a data set, for example, we released a data set called FindWeb that I think has been used in over 1,000 models. So when you release a data set, it's actually not a fact that can have a massive impact because it can be used in many models. So I'm excited about data sets. And last one, maybe evaluation. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. I think we're at the very early days. People are doing evaluation the wrong way. Just looking at one massive public leaderboard that doesn't really tell them much about how the model is going to perform on their own use case. So I'm excited to see more people focusing on evaluation and making progress on how do we define a model is good or not good for your own specific data use case.
Well, Clem, thank you so much for doing this. It's been wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, it's Matt Turck again. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mad Podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd be very grateful if you would consider subscribing if you haven't already, or leaving a positive review or comment on whichever platform you're watching this or listening to this episode from. This really helps us build a podcast and get great guests. Thanks, and see you at the next episode.